Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to today's webinar sponsored by Gordian, titled Construction Procurement at Speed. I am Tamel Harbison, and I will be assisting with any technical issues you might experience today. Before we get started, I would like to just go over a couple of housekeeping notes. To minimize those technical difficulties, we ask that you log out of any VPNs. And if you continue to experience technical difficulties, we ask that you type in the chat what your issue is, and then you will receive a private message from me. If you have any questions throughout the presentation, we ask that you ask those in the Q&A tab and upvote the ones you like the most. We do have one poll today, so we ask that when it pops up on your screen, you make your selection. And in the handouts tab, there are a few things you can download, from the presentation to the recording, as well as the PDH certificate. This webinar is being recorded and will be posted up on the SME webpage at a later date. And without further ado, I would like to turn it over to our moderator for today, Lisa Cooley. You now have the digital floor.
Good afternoon. Thanks, Tamel. We want to kick things off with a quick poll so that we can get a read on the audience. Please let us know where you come from. Are you military, a civilian government agency, or from a private business or academic institution? Just a quick note, in consideration of busy government schedules, our webinar today was actually pre-recorded, so we're going to be kicking that off shortly. But we have live today David Scruggs from US Army and Neil Tuck from Gordian, prepared to answer questions at the end of the webinar. So we do encourage everyone to put their questions into the Q&A feature of BidMarker. Tamel, do we have a read on the survey results?
Yes, and it looks like at 32%, we have civilian ag government agencies, and then it's a three-way tie with small business, medium business, and large business.
Okay, super. Thank you so much. And let's cue up the recording, Tamel. Good afternoon. I'm Lisa Cooley, the Vice President of Federal Solutions at Gordian, and we are so excited to welcome you to today's event, Construction Procurement at Speed, sponsored by Gordian. Inefficiencies in past public sector construction have resulted in over $270 billion in costs in just 1 year, suggesting an opportunity for some government agencies to increase efficiency, to cut costs and time leveraging IDIQ contracts. Today's government and industry experts will look at the past, present, and future state of construction IDIQ contracts in government, discussing how and why to improve construction procurement with agile and cost-effective processes and bring it to life with real-world use cases. Over the next hour, you'll hear from the following industry leaders. Josh Okada is the Manager of Custom Research for Government Business Council, the research arm of GovExec. Christopher Reinhardt is the Chief of Military Programs Branch for the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers, New York District. Prior to his role at New York District, Chris Reinhardt was involved with a number of SATOC and JOC contracts in his longtime role as a project manager for the Savannah District Corps of Engineers. There, he managed over 25 JOC, SATOC, and MATOC contracts utilizing unit price basis. David Scruggs is the Chief of the Fort Riley, Kansas Directorate of Public Works Engineering Services Division. David has been involved in job order contracts since nearly the inception of his career in 1985. He was part of the original JOC Steering Committee as Forscom's Installation Engineer Representative. Fort Riley is now in its 9th JOC Sabre contract, which is a 5-year, $75 million contract. And Fort Riley under David's leadership, has awarded over 2,000 task orders totaling $287 million with Jock and Sabre. Finally, Neil Tuck is the manager of Jock operations at Gordian. Neil has built his entire career at Gordian, fulfilling a number of different roles, but since 2012, has guided federal agencies in the development and implementation of job order contracts, as well as the ongoing operation of job order contracts, utilizing Gordian's turnkey system. And now I'd like to hand it over to Josh Okada.
Lisa, thank you so much for the introduction. Everyone, again, my name is Josh Okada, a manager of research at Government Business Council. And so we've, diving a little bit more into the issue of, public sector construction and procurement. The big issue that we found is that there are occasional inefficiencies in public sector construction. And so, for example, once this resulted in over 270 billion in costs in just 1 year. So this suggests an opportunity to cut costs in construction procurement. So just to put this issue a little bit more into context, why this issue matters. Construction-related spending accounts for 13% of global GDP, and federal contract spending experienced a 6% growth in fiscal year 2019, with some of the most contract spending in construction. In the research that we've done, what we found is that there's, to dive a little bit more into the issue, we found three main pillars of, this construction procurement issue within government. The first one is slow bidding processes. The second is, the best pricing is not always secured. And then the third issue that we've identified is staffing gaps. And so going back to the first one of slow bidding processes, what we found is that bidding can last for a minimum of, half to a full year in total, which is quite a bit of time. And what this does is it creates some friction for projects, especially, the ones that need urgency, construction projects that do need urgency. It does, create quite a problem there where you need to move fast, but the bidding process can take some time. For the second part, where the best pricing is not secured, 44% of procurement budgets were awarded uncompetitively in previous years. And so, competitive pricing analysis is incredibly important, but sometimes that, that best pricing is not always secured here. And we're seeing that with some of, the historical data in government construction procurement. The third is staffing gaps. And so procurement staffing has dropped in some agencies. For example, the Army's requirements development workforce declined by 22% from 2008 to 2017. And what this did is resulted in a 4,400 shortage of procurement-related personnel. And part of this shortage was due to a lack of a qualified workforce. And so we're seeing, the staffing gaps, and best pricing is not secured in a slow bidding process. And all of these together do create some, procurement inefficiencies across government. And so this begs the question of what can be done. And so we've identified three recommendations here. And the first is to leverage competitive pricing. The second is to leverage single contract awards for multiple projects. And then the third, tying into that second point there, is to reduce administrative work. So circling back to the first one, leverage competitive pricing. As a last resort, this might be using, for example, market research for pricing data, looking at government platforms such as the GSA Acquisition Gateway for additional resources to help secure that competitive pricing. The second is to leverage single contract awards for multiple projects. So what this can do is it can decrease administrative work by minimizing the need to circle back to the beginning of a procurement process each time a new construction project is needed. And then the third is to reduce administrative work, especially with those labor shortages that we mentioned earlier. A report sponsored by the United States Army Corps of Engineers found that job order contracting can help improve partnerships with contractors, contractor performance, and help streamline the design of the scope of work. So all of this together can help contribute to a more cost-effective to more cost-effective project outcomes. And so that begs the question: what is JOC? What is job order contracting? Job order contracting is a form of an indefinite delivery, indefinite quantity contract. And what this is, what it does is it establishes a single competitively bid contract for multiple projects. It also uses a unit price book to establish fair, preset prices for construction tasks. And what it can help do is shorten the procurement process to as low as 45 to 60 days. So an example of a use case is the Army awarded a JOC contract for a task order at the Kauai Naval Base when 9 buildings needed renovation after some severe environmental conditions. And because of the very rapid nature of JOC, they were able to complete the project in much less time than it usually takes with the traditional contracting method. JOC, in fact, can reduce procurement time by about 3 to 9 months. Neil, that's all on my end. I'll pass it to you now. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Josh. So today we're really focused on how federal agencies can identify cost savings and agile processes in construction procurement by leveraging IDIQ contracts. So to our panel, how effectively do you think federal construction-related spending is being managed today?
Ooh, that's a loaded question right there. This is Chris, Neil. I think in a lot of respects, it's being well managed in regards of planning, and more importantly than that, the emphasis on master planning being more important. Specifically with what I've noticed is with the facility investment program, which has been the key pusher through Installation Management Command and Army Materials Command. It's really forcing each of the garrisons and installations to really look at that forecast of projects they have coming up, and sooner rather than later, even more so than ever before, have those projects developed to at least a 15% design, or at least have a much better cost estimate than what the local garrisons and others have been producing in the past. So that way they can project more accurately what funds they need to actually execute those projects a year out, or in some cases even 2 years out, which is not always a fair assessment or a fair thing to ask. But because of the tighter budgets and tighter constraints, that's definitely one of the things being asked of the garrisons to do.
Yes, Chris, and this is David Scruggs. You know, the FIP is usually a lot larger size in projects. So a lot of times the installation will go to the Corps of Engineers through a BATOC or a SATOC design build contract for those types of projects. But also at the installation, we have a lot of projects that are under those thresholds, and I think we have challenges synchronizing and the prioritization of execution of our requirements to the availability of our budget. Lots of times, since we have a one-year funding cycle, our budget is not identified or quantified until as late as the second quarter, sometimes January, February, and that only gives us 6 to 7 months to execute our yearly annual work plan. So having a pre-competed award procurement tools available to quickly develop and obligate ISRM requirements is critical to our installation anyway. Over.
So what do you guys consider to be the greatest opportunities to achieve project efficiency moving forward in the future?
Well, again, this is David. Since we can't control or even predict when the budget will be determined, we work off of we try to have a good annual work plan with a prioritization of our projects, kind of like a 1 to N list for our yearly execution. And this way we can continue to develop projects even if even if we don't have funding for all of the projects, we can continue to work them as unfunded projects and put them on the shelves. So when funding becomes available, we'll be able to execute those. The only risk with that is that sometimes we work things up and they just never get funded. But but the benefit far outweighs the risk.
And I'll just add to that, definitely the discussions and from my perspective, sitting in what I'm invited by the garrisons and the installations to sit in on those annual work plans, the real property planning boards and the installation planning boards to kind of see what's being forecasted, what the garrison, just like David mentioned, is getting worked up and developed, even if it's just to sit on the shelf and be ready to execute. But from there, I usually end up having the follow-on discussions with those installation and garrisons about what contract tools they're thinking that they would use, whether it's through their own contracting mechanisms or through the core, and what other types of contracts, i.e. the JOCs, the SATOCs, the MATOCs, that would be most effective, especially if some of those programs or some of those projects are multiple buildings or multiple programs being developed in conjunction with one another, where it'll go over a series of times. So something like a MATOC or something where putting a JOC in place makes sense. We'll have those discussions so that way we can be more efficient in the future.
Awesome. So what are your thoughts or what are your opinions on the first time you heard about like IDIQ contracts and JOC contracts and SATOC contracts, pre-priced contracts? Give me your impressions of those types of contracts in executing work.
Well, at the installation level, we've been doing IDIQ and requirements type contracts back since the late 80s. Most of those were on specific construction discipline type contracts, like our roads repair contract and a roof repair and replacement contract. And then we also incorporated those types of contracts into our service contracts. Many times in the, when we started out, those prices for those individual tasks were bid individually by the contractors, and we did not set pre-priced prices like we do nowadays. There's a big advantage to having the pre-priced prices so that the contractor does not try to manipulate the bid schedule.
Awesome.
And I'll add that I think initially, mainly because of some leftover anxiety from some folks, fear because of how long it had used to take to put IDIQs in place and all the different loopholes you'd have to get through, the documentation in order to make it happen, and evaluation boards. But I think as folks have understood through the contracting channels what it takes to put them in place, I think that anxiety level has come back down, and really understanding the pre-priced items and how to incorporate that type of mechanism into the contracts. Once folks have been educated on that, it's been a much more efficient tool, and folks are looking to use them much more often. Just like David mentioned, it started with simple things like paving and roofing, and has expanded from there to more general construction contracts, and obviously much bigger contracts, even with design build being incorporated into that. So again, I think as folks have become more educated and realize how diverse IDIQ contracts can be and where you can apply them, I think it's been much more useful.
Great. So what I think I heard you say, and I agree with, is that education on the data and the use of the contracts and how the contract's supposed to work is what has helped folks overcome any kind of fear or reservations that they might have.
Yes, I would completely agree. And I know from talking with you, Neil, in the past, and others there in Gordian, some folks, and I'll use my organization, the core, just didn't really understand the different tools, especially with pre-priced mechanisms that were available, and more importantly, how to actually incorporate them into contracts and how that fits into the traditional mold of federal acquisition regulation contracting. But once that education and once the path is known, then it's just a matter of getting folks in there to execute it.
Awesome.
Yes, I also agree with that. And another thing, whatever reservations you may have, I think a lot of the reservations are outweighed by the ability to pre-compete and award contracts and have capability just sitting there waiting for a requirement. You know, and to have that cost predictability ahead of time so that you can price out projects and really kind of hone in on your budget. It really helps down at the installation level, you know, gain efficiencies, you know, and a lot of times with these IDIQ type contracts, you can do all of a lot of the contract administrative requirements ahead of time, like submittal approval and those types of things. So you gain efficiencies there as you write task orders on the contract.
Awesome. So what kind of projects have you guys seen completed in your careers with job order contracting, SATOC, those types of procurement methods?
I mean, this is Chris. I mean, I've seen everything from full-blown barracks built, the expansion of the Sand Hill basic training area at Fort Benning, completely expanded with 2 full battalions worth of barracks on a SATOC, design-build SATOC. MATOC's the same way, multiple barracks, battalion headquarters, tactical equipment maintenance facilities, even ranges, especially when Fort Knox moved the armor school down to Fort Benning. Huge expansion there that we utilized a MATOC. With jocks, you know, as large as you could with a jock to stay under certain thresholds, but, you know, all the way down to just renovating, you know, a commander's office or the bathrooms in a garrison commander's building. So really the depth and breadth of what you can use them for is really unlimited. It's just a matter of how you set it up and knowing and understanding what tool you have in hand.
Yeah, absolutely. Here at the installation on our jock, we've awarded everything from, you know, the minimum of 2.5 thousand, you know, clear up to over $5 million building renovations. You know, we do an awful lot of HVAC and electrical type of work because I think that's just you know, a lot of the systems that need a lot of maintenance and replacement as facilities get older. You know, back between the 2005 2010, we had a big BRAC buildup here at Fort Riley, and jock was critical in a lot of those renovations. And in 2009, we awarded $42 million worth of renovations on 125 task orders in 1 year. So, you know, jock had great capability, and it filled the need, and we you know, helps us succeed in our mission.
Do you guys ever see projects where you're repurposing a building? Those tend to be projects that catch my eye. Taking something that is either underutilized or unutilized and then repurposing it and watching buildings just come alive, be reinvigorated. Is that a typical jock project in your purview?
Yes, that's very typical, Neil, on the things that we do here at Fort Riley. We've you know, we're going through this, what they call R-Struck, which kind of reorganizes facilities to organizations and bringing current facilities up to current day facility standards. And so we do an awful lot of renovation or repurposing, maybe going from a 5-company operation facility, conforming it into a one company operation facility with all the current amenities required in today's standards. So we do an awful lot of that in jock. Those run, you know, usually between $2 and $3 million, and we can get them scoped out in probably less than 90 days, and construct them in about 270 days normally.
And I'm starting to see more of that, specifically at a couple of the installations I'm most involved with now at West Point and Waterfleet Arsenal, where you've had these historic facilities that have been here in some cases well over 100 years. They've fallen into some disrepair, or they've been unfortunately Frankensteined on the inside over different iterations of contracts. Master planners now actually coming up with a good idea, a more beneficial use of them. And so having those jock contractors get in there, actually make this space more usable. Sometimes a matter of even converting the entire category code of the building based on what the new purpose is for. And what's unique about those buildings is that even though it's a smaller jock contract, they still got to comply, especially if we're talking any replacement of windows or exterior intrusions, with the state historic preservation offices and those folks from the cultural resources perspective, that they've got to keep the integrity of the outside because of the fact they are historic. And so even though it's a smaller per se jock contractor, they still essentially have some of the same requirements as the larger contractors we have in these spaces.
Sure. Do you feel like jock do you feel like that they perform well in aligning with budgets and with timelines, or do you see any discrepancies in programs that you're involved in?
This is Chris. I would say that they perform very well with when funding becomes available, when the customers are ready to execute and walk the project, begin the scope. I think those are the quick turnaround pieces of it. I think, unfortunately, the longest part for us is sometimes just being able to get the task order RFPs issued as quickly as the other portions of it can be done, and following up with the paperwork. I think that's a part that, I'll be honest, I think in some respects we still haven't completely cracked the nut on, but I think we're getting closer. And I think a lot of that has to do with some of the FAR rules being able to push some of those authorities closer down to the field representatives, the CORs and the ACOs, with the exception of those things that do need to go all the way back to the district offices, in our case, to the KOs.
Yes, and I'll echo what Chris just said. One of the big benefits is they provide flexibility. We've had the ability to react to urgent requirements. We've awarded some urgent projects in less than a week to get from identification of the requirement to construction start. So it provides that flexibility. And another thing it does, it allows us to develop projects ahead of time prior to having funding available, and so that we can put those, what we call on the shelf. We can put those projects on the shelf and wait till we get funding. And that allows us a lot of flexibility in our fourth quarter budget obligations. We might get a couple of years ago, we had a MATOC project that we could not award late in the year end, and we had about $6 million in excess funds from that project that couldn't be awarded, that we would have lost if we wouldn't have the availability of these types of contracts. And we had other jock projects setting available and other IDIQ type contracts available to spend that $6 million on within a day, so that we did not have to return that funding unobligated. So that's a real big benefit, because as you get into late fourth quarter awards, which we normally do, a lot of times the contracts aren't awarded for what we have, what we've estimated for and what we've funded for. And so sometimes there's pluses and minuses that we have to balance out at the year end. And this is a very good tool to allow that to happen.
Got it. So you're one of the biggest advantages for you, David, would be having them ready on the shelf, scope developed, you're ready to go. All you have to do is pull them right off the shelf and award them.
Absolutely. That's a huge benefit for us. And like I said, sometimes we don't get our budget until second quarter. Well, we can, as soon as our annual work plan is identified in the fourth quarter of the previous year, we can start working on those projects ahead of time, and so we have them available as soon as funding does become available. It kind of lets us balance out our workload a little bit.
Sure. So, Chris, I want to kind of go back to something that you had said earlier, and ask this question. Do you think it's more difficult to set up a JOC or SATOC in comparison to other procurement methods, other government procurement methods, and why or why not?
I don't think it's necessarily harder, especially if you understand what the requirements are, what the contract is ultimately going to be used for, and then the documentation of it. And since moving from one district to the next, every district in the Corps operates generally the same, but then who actually reviews documents changes from Office of Counsel and contracting officers. Some are much more risk adverse as opposed to others of, well, how expansive, for example, can a SATOC be? Will it cover just one installation, or will it cover one fairly small geographic area, or will it cover a series of 3 states? And, that is something that has changed and evolved over the years, partially because of small business advocates and wanting to make sure they give the opportunities for small businesses to develop and become up and coming. And I understand that. So I don't necessarily think it's harder. I think it's just a matter of understanding what the risk is that folks are going to be looking at, and tailoring those contracts that you want, and being very specific to document it in a way that you'll be able to actually execute it and actually get through all the approval wickets in order to ultimately get it awarded. So I think that's the key. And that myself, I know has been my lesson learned after moving up to New York District and getting just, a few of the IDIQs awarded, and just understanding different personalities, different views of risk, and, what we need to do to overcome that or to mitigate that risk in order to successfully award those contracts. So that's my key there.
Gotcha. And David, what have you guys done to mitigate some of those risks in order to set up an IDIQ JOC Sabre type contract?
Well, really, basically writing the contracts and everything, and getting them through the procurement stages are all very, very similar. The JOCs and the SATOCs and MATOCs are usually awarded best value, which goes through a more rigorous evaluation process, and setting up the evaluation requirements and things like that. And so it does take a little bit more effort for these best values compared to like a low price, technically acceptable type of contract. But you get a lot better input from the requiring activities, to get what they're looking for as far as what technical capability, and those types of requirements. The SATOCs and MATOCs are normally a design build, which incorporates a 2-stage procurement evaluation process, which takes a little bit more effort than some of the JOCs. But almost all the contracts, especially these MATOCs, SATOCs, and JOCs, require just a really good development and review of technical documents, your specifications and the price book and in the job order contract. You need to review the pricing data, ensure that you have a good contractable price book that is applicable to all possible work that you're anticipating, and that the pricing is localized to your area, so that everybody's kind of familiar with what the pricing in the area is. And all of those documents have to be current and as accurate as possible, and as long as you're doing that, I think you're going to have success.
Awesome. Agreed. So I want to shift gears a little bit to regulatory controls like the FAR, right? So we all agree, we all understand that the FAR helps ensure compliance with the contract and with just acquisition regulations, but they also create challenges. It also creates challenges in execution. It can slow down the process. It can hinder agility, right? What challenges have you faced in meeting FAR or contract compliance or other requirements?
Well, Neil, this is David, and all I've done is federal contracting, so I'm used to these. I'm used to these boundaries, and and the FAR. It's just in federal contracting just has to be followed, and so a lot of times, basically the FAR is written if it doesn't specifically say thou shall not, then you may. As long as you have contracting officers that will accept that risk. It really comes down to how good a relationship and trust you have between your contracting office and the requiring activity. And some contracting officers will allow a little bit more flexibility than others, but ultimately we have to follow the FAR requirements. And I know specifically for the JOC FARs, we tried to write those, so that they're as flexible as we can down at the user level. So, but a lot of those were written. A lot of the requirements in the JOC FARs were written to eliminate or alleviate fraud, waste, and abuse opportunities.
And I'll definitely reiterate something David said about, that relationship with your contracting officers, even with the Office of Counsel, who give, the legal sufficiency documentation on everything you're doing. Having that relationship is key. And what I have found, especially with introducing new tools to folks that haven't used them before, especially up here in New York District, there are a lot of questions, a lot of risk. And the great thing is the relationship has been such that, well, you know what? Let's ask. So, we've run up the chain through our division all the way up to the SCO, the senior contracting official, who ironically enough is actually the same one for Savannah District and New York District. So that was great in the sense that, hey, I knew I was going to get essentially the same answer from the person that ultimately says yay or nay. But what it did is it gave the confidence down to the lower level, to the contracting officer who had never done it before. And so, as David said, that relationship with the contracting officer is key. And really the most recent things that have come out, J&A justifications for sole source for certain products that customers want or certain types of equipment, which is understandable because that's what the operations and maintenance chiefs are familiar with, have inventory stock of. Some of the rules on those have changed recently, but the great thing is, the KOs and others have kept us informed about those changes. So we're able to get J&As developed ahead of time before we go out with contracts and have everything in place so there's no hiccup as we're getting ready to award.
Gotcha. So what I think I heard from both of you guys was that just like JOC and SATOC is based on a level of trust with a private sector outside of the government organization, to have a successful JOC, SATOC, IDIQ program, there has to also be internal trust with contracting. So it's like trust flows through engineering from contracting to contractors, and managing that relationship in either direction is a really key aspect to having an excellent performing JOC program.
Yeah, this is Chris. Most definitely, especially if, as I mentioned earlier, we're trying to push some of those authorities down to the lower levels, to the field offices that just traditionally here where I am now they hadn't had those authorities before. Not that they can't, not that the FAR is limiting them, they just haven't because everything has been held up at the higher level. So having a good relationship with that KO lets them trust us to do that and to be able to execute. So most definitely.
Awesome.
Yes, and I'll kind of add on to that a little bit. The key to success is not only a two-way working relationship with the contracting office, but also with the contractor, and all three partners have to work interchangeably. a good thing, a good three-way communication and the ability to work together is just key to success. You know, if everybody's working for a common goal, it sure helps. But all it takes is one leg of that three-legged stool to fail, and the whole thing fails.
Yeah, and that's been my experience, is just that really in a solid JOC program, you got 3 partners working for the same goal. And that's what I love about it, because it truly is a partnership.
And Neil, if I might add, you know, there's a lot of trust that is built, you know, between a good working relationship, and trust is everything.
Yes, absolutely. And on the topic of partnership, there's a report sponsored by the Corps of Engineers that found that job order contracting, which obviously is a form of IDIQ contracts, helps improve partnership with contractors. It helps improve contractor performance and a streamlined development of the scope of work, which all contribute to more cost-effective project outcomes and building trust. Do you guys have an example? Can you think of a time that a JOC program fostered a strong relationship with a contractor?
Well, I again, you know, this is David, and you know, again, you know, we work really hard at that every time we start up a, you know, a JOC type contract. You know, it's just building that trust, building the expectations between all 3 partners. You know, it's just key. I just can't express it enough. You know, sometimes we'll get, you know, some personality conflicts, and so, you know, and it becomes a real challenge to work through some of those, and sometimes we have to get, you know, upper management or you know, we might have to kind of change personnel, or ask, look for a different change of personnel, and even the federal offices, you know, the contracting and requiring activity, you know, offices, just to get personalities that can work together, you know, and make it all work.
Agreed.
I was just going to say, in the course of working in both districts, I've seen contractors come in and get a very small JOC contract, and, you know, have to be very intimately involved, do multiple site visits, really a lot of hands-on, especially if they're new to the government, new to the Corps. And I've actually seen some of those small contractors then grow and become then a SATOC contractor for the Corps of Engineers. And even from there, even join some of our larger MATOCs. So it really is a kind of a partnership, and really it's a mentorship of growing some of these smaller companies into much larger, much more reliable companies that you've trusted from the very beginning up through. And it's not unheard of to know generations of folks within the same contractor that you've worked with.
And those are my favorite stories. Stories of contractor success through job order contracting. That I see it everywhere. Contractors that want to do the work and and share that common goal are generally successful. And this is a mechanism for improving, you know, taking a small business and turning that small business into what is no longer a small business. It's amazing. It's wonderful. All based on relationships. So, gentlemen, as we close out, I'd like to leave our audience with some practical advice on next steps for improving their construction projects. What is one thing that people listening to this could do this week to simplify construction IDIQ project contract awards, all while meeting relevant compliance requirements?
Chris, you want to lead off, or do you want me to go?
I'm just thinking, if you got one right off the top of your head, David, go ahead.
Hey, I sure do.
Go for it.
The best thing is do your homework up front. I can't express it enough to have good contract documents, good specifications, well-defined and accurate prices. Know and abide by your contract, all three parties, contracting officer, contractor, and requiring activity. Even if it's not in your favor, the contract is the ruling document, and you just, sometimes it's in your favor and sometimes it isn't. And so, being able to trust that document and comply by it, even if it's not in your favor, shows trust with the other partners. You build trust and honesty between government and contractor, and this solidifies that relationship and that we talked about that is so critical. Chris, to you.
I gotcha. No, that was a great one, David. What I was going to say, I'll ditto that, and then I'll add to this. Understand what you have in your own arsenal or your own stable or your own toolbox with your in-house capabilities, whether it's the actual contract tools themselves, procurement tools, or with the ability of your in-house or your AE contracts to develop those specifications for the customer. So that way, when you actually go to the customer, you know exactly what you can offer them to help develop that procurement or help develop that those contract documents, as you mentioned, David, into fruition to be able to actually execute something in the future. So just understanding what you have in your own organization, and if you don't have it, if you look around and realize you really don't have it, making sure that you do your homework to figure out what you do need to get. And at the end of the day, really what I see that lead to is really helping with customer expectations and realistic schedules and timelines for the customer.
Yeah, those are very good points, Chris. Not one contract vehicle doesn't fit all, and so having a good toolbox with different tools to fit the situation is really beneficial. So I agree with everything you said.
Awesome. Well, gentlemen, thank you very much. Thank you for your time. It's been wonderful.
All right, we're going to kick off a live Q&A here. I believe that Neil Tuck from Gordian and David Scruggs from U.S. Army are going to be joining us online. If you guys want to flip on your cameras and your mics, that would be great.
Good morning or afternoon, wherever you are.
Afternoon. Most places. So we're going to start with a question that is very pertinent, and I'm gonna kick it to Mr. Scruggs first. Jim Lee asks, as the construction and real estate markets are heating up, and we all know we're seeing sort of unprecedented construction material inflation right now, and many contractors and the government are struggling with this. But are the independent cost estimates within these IDIQ programs and these unit price programs keeping up with real-time inflation? And I'll just kind of expand that by asking what strategies are you using to address this unprecedented inflation? And I'm going to kick that to you first, Mr. Scruggs.
Well, that's a real good one. That's something that we're kind of keeping abreast of and trying to monitor on a day-by-day basis. Because this is kind of unprecedented, and we just don't know what's going to happen. We're seeing long lead times on getting materials, so we have to be a little bit more flexible on some of our contract periods of performance. And right now, I don't, we have contracts in place that have pre-purchased a lot of their materials. And so in some of those contracts, it's really not an issue because, except for maybe delivery of materials, because they bought ahead of the crisis that we're dealing with right now. On newer contracts, especially like on the job order contract, where we have pre-priced price books and things, those always lag a little bit behind the market. probably about a year lag. So sometimes, they're like in this case, our prices are probably going to be a little lower than what the contractor is going to be experiencing. But then on the tail end of this, when we come out of this crisis and prices start to lower, our prices will be higher at that point in time. So over time, it will balance out. But our focus is to be fair and reasonable, and keep contractors solvent and involved in our businesses, because we depend on that, and we couldn't do it without them. So again, I can't stress it enough. It all comes down to your legal staff and your contracting officers and your contracting staff on how all three of us decide on how to properly handle that.
Great. Thank you, Mr. Scruggs. And Neil, I know you have been working with a number of DoD customers on strategies to address inflationary pressures within the unit price book. Do you want to speak a little bit about how an enhanced job order contracting system can respond to those pressures?
Sure, absolutely. We've got quite a few programs that there is this pressure, and David talked about keeping your contractor solvent. If they can't perform the work for the price in the book, then your program dies. So one of the things that we've done is it takes a contract mod. We typically only want to update that data set once a year. But with a contract mod, when everybody's on board as a team, we can update the data set so that it reflects current market pricing, so that the contractor can actually remain solvent, so that they can actually go and get that lumber, those metals that have been highly volatile. And then in the future, if we need to, if the market were to crash or to come down significantly, and there's still lots of runway to the next option or to the next book being published, then we can do another update to the data. That's typically how we've handled it. We have some clients that have handled it a little bit differently from that, but most of our clients, particularly the larger programs, like the idea of updating the data in real time when it's necessary for the solvency of the program.
Hey Lisa, I might add that even if you adjust your prices by economic price increases, you're still going to lag. By the time that economic data gets in place, and by the time you apply it to your contract, you're still going to probably lag by at least 3 to 4 months at the earliest before you start seeing any change in prices on your contract. And so it's kind of like what I said. You're going to be a little bit behind in the and in the front end of it, and then you're gonna make it up on the tail end of it when those markets go back down.
Yeah, I think what I'm hearing is key here is that there has to be a little flexibility, a little give and take, but also I'm hearing that the data, the ability to update the data is becoming more sophisticated, and especially in these more enhanced and customer specific programs. So, all right, I've got a question, probably directed more to David. What characteristic make contractors more desirable for IDIQ or job order contracts? What are the characteristics that you look for in a contractor partner?
I look at technical capability, because a lot of our scopes of work are performance based. Basically we're stating what the end result is to be, and so we rely significantly on the contractor's technical capability to bring solutions to the table. And another thing we look at is our volume is very flexible. And so sometimes we have an extreme amount of work, like this last February when we froze up about 130 buildings, and we had to do a lot of projects in a short amount of time. We also look for contractors that have reach back capability for bring additional key personnel into the project, to put projects together, and then and contractors that have a good subcontractor base, and that maybe can reach out of the area to bring extra subcontractors in when needed, because that's because unfortunately we don't have a very consistent construction cycle. We have lots of peaks and valleys, and that's where that really comes in handy.
Okay. And Neil, would you like to weigh in on that one as well?
Sure, I'll weigh in. I appreciate it, Lisa. First of all, I agree with everything that David said. Like, that's completely true. I just like to take a step back from that as well and say, every installation and every location is a little bit different. And one of the things that I like to remind the customers of is figure that out. Figure out what your goals are in the planning stage. Before you plan your JOC, or SABRE or SATOC or IDIQ program, what are you looking for? Are you looking for a smaller local company? I love local companies who are employing folks that live in the area. They have a stake in it. But that's not necessarily, if your program is massive, you may not have a local base that can handle that. If you're in a very remote location, you may have to pull from another area. So really, the answer in my mind is that the way that David answered is all true, but you also should have an idea of the kind of contractor that you want in the planning phase. That's where it's important. Do your homework, just like he said in the video. Do your homework.
All right. Super. I'm gonna ask a question. I'm gonna adapt a question just a little bit. So Gary Engel asks, what do you see as the ideal range of the number of contractors placed on an IDIQ? And I think this really speaks to a distinction between a single award task order contract like a JOC, or sometimes a design build SATOC like Chris Reinhardt was talking about, versus a multiple award contract, and how different those tools are. And really the key differential is the reliance on a unit price book. And so, David, I'd love to hear from you about, I'm sure you've worked on NATOCs where there are multiple contractors kind of competing for task orders. How does that differ in terms of a tool for the government versus a single award contract where you're relying on a unit price book for fair and accurate pricing?
Well, I think the number of contractors awarded on a MATOC, that's developed during the acquisition strategy between the contracting office and the requiring activity, and also on the sources sought that we go out for pre-contract award to see what kind of interests are in those types of or that are in the area. So that's kind of look to see what's available and then see what the sweet spot is to meet the requirement. I know that on some MATOCs they have a 8A pool or a small business pool, and then have an unrestricted pool also. So they determine when we cut a task order which pool or the contracting officer determines which pool that we compete in. And usually it's a pool of anywhere between 3 to 6 contractors. So it doesn't do a lot of good to have a bunch of contractors when they all don't compete, because they're not required to put in a bid on each project. And so the better competition, the better we feel that the pricing is fair and reasonable to the requirement. and so it's we get better pricing. So we kind of looked at the more is better type of thing, and we get a lot of these MATOCs are also kind of a best value type of award also. So we get better options and better alternatives to look at.
David, how does that differ from a job order contract, which is not a multiple award contract? And what is the different value proposition between a MATOC versus a single award contract like JOC that relies on a unit price basis?
Well, I think I prefer the JOC type contracts myself, just because I have so much experience with it, and I think that a lot of it is because of the cost predictability part of it, because we can do a takeoff with out of the contract prices and pretty much know where we're going to end up. Where we really don't know on a MATOC what kind of pricing we're going to get into. If it's a late fourth quarter award, and they know we have to spend the money at the end of the year, sometimes those prices tend to get a little bit inflated, where on a JOC, it doesn't matter what time of the year, because all the prices are consistent throughout the year. So I think that's where I prefer the job order contract. And plus, we can when we're discussing scope within the JOC process, we have a lot of back and forth discussions with the contractor on how and we get a lot of input on how he plans to do the work, where we don't really get that. We don't have that verbal back and forth in a MATOC type of contract award.
Excellent. Thank you, David. So I believe that we are at time. I know we have a couple of other questions that have come in that we'll endeavor to circulate among the experts and answer directly of folks to make sure that all of the questions are answered. But I want to be respectful of people's time and schedules, and so we thank you for joining us today. And Neil and David, thank you for your participation and in the live Q&A.
Yeah, it's been my
Thank you,
pleasure.
Lisa.